The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft golden glow through the kitchen window. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, a comforting fragrance that anchored the morning routine. The protagonist stood by the counter, the steady hum of the coffee machine, a background melody as he poured himself a steaming cup. His wife, already at the table, smiled up at him with a warmth that made the world feel right. Their lives had been simple but contenta, carefully constructed piece that had endured through the years as he handed her the cup. Their fingers brushed briefly, a familiar touch that carried with it years of shared moments. Comforting in the way she looked at him, something that told him everything was as it should be. They had built this life together, this home, this bond. He felt certain it was unbreakable. They sat across from each other, the quiet of the morning only broken by the soft clink of spoons against cups. The conversations they had were always easy, gentle, revolving around nothing in particular: how their day had gone, the small victories, and the minor annoyances of daily life. But in these moments, these simple, unspoken exchanges, there was a quiet understanding that spoke volumes. They had built this together, a life that felt solid, anchored in trust and mutual respect. Professionally, he had accomplished what he set out to do. His career was thriving, his reputation strong. Personally, their marriage was everything he had ever dreamed of. She had always been his rock, the one person he knew he could count on no matter what. He couldn't remember a time when he'd questioned their connection. Even when challenges arose, they faced them as a team. He was proud of the life they had crafted, a life that, to him, felt perfect in every way. As they sat in silence, savoring their coffee, he couldn't have imagined that the foundation of their life was about to shift, that something dark was quietly taking root just beneath the surface. His life was balanced. His marriage was secure. Everything he had worked for was in place. Or so he thought. The changes were subtle at first, so small that they could have easily been dismissed. But over time, they began to build like cracks in the foundation of a house. It's barely noticeable at first, but growing wider with every passing day. It started with her late nights. At first, he chalked it up to work, or perhaps just the pressures of everyday life. She was always the one to handle things with grace, balancing both their careers with the effortless poise he had come to admire. But as the nights stretched longer, he couldn't help but feel the nagging sensation that something was off. She would come home later than usual, often exhausted but never sharing much about her day. The conversations that once flowed easily between them now felt strained, as if there was something she was holding back. There were small moments when he tried to reach out to her, ask about her day, but her responses were distant, almost absent. Her eyes, which had always sparkled with warmth and affection, seemed clouded now. There was a hesitation in her voice, a coldness that he hadn't heard before. It wasn't anger, it was something quieter, more unnerving. A lack of connection. A subtle withdrawal that made his heart tighten with a sense of unease. The once familiar warmth of their home had started to feel colder. He could feel it in the air, the way the temperature seemed to drop when he walked into the room, even if the heating was on. The laughter that had once filled the walls was gone, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to settle like dust. He would sit across from her at dinner, and the distance between them felt tangible, almost suffocating. She would glance at him briefly before turning her attention elsewhere, averted eyes betraying a detachment that sent a chill down his spine. He tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that it was just a phase, that she was stressed, or maybe just needing space. But the more he thought about it, the harder it was to shake the feeling that something was wrong. One night, as they sat together on the couch, he reached for her hand, a gesture he had always taken for granted. But she pulled away just a bit too quickly. Her smile was tight, almost forced, as she turned her attention to the television. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice tentative, unsure. She nodded, but the answer was hollow. "I'm fine, just tired." But it wasn't just fatigue that lingered in the air. It was something deeper, more unsettling. Something he couldn't name, but he could feel gnawing at him with each passing day. Was he imagining things? Was he overreacting? He found himself doubting his own perceptions, second-guessing every interaction, every small detail. The trust he had once taken for granted now felt fragile. He wanted to believe it was all in his head. But deep down, he couldn't ignore the growing sense that the life they had built was slowly slipping away from him. Something was wrong, and it felt like he was losing her, piece by piece, without ever really understanding why. It was late in the evening when the revelation came. Sudden and brutal, nothing like he had expected, but everything he feared. He had just returned from a meeting, the weight of the day still hanging on his shoulders. The house was quiet, too quiet. He could hear her voice, soft and low, as she spoke from the bedroom. Normally he would have walked in and greeted her with a smile, but tonight something held him back. His instincts, which had been growing sharper by the day, told him to stay still. To listen, he stood at the threshold, frozen, the faint sound of her voice drifting through the crack in the door. The words were indistinct at first, muffled, but then they began to sharpen. It was like the universe had shifted, bringing his worst fears into clear focus. "I need to make sure he doesn't get away with it." Her voice rang out, cold and calculating. "He's unstable. I'll say he's mentally unfit, that he's been hiding it for years. Believe me, he's got a temper. One will think twice." The words hit him like a slap in the face, each one a strike against the foundation of everything he had built, everything he had trusted. His heart pounded in his chest, his vision momentarily blurring as the weight of her words sank in. Felt the ground beneath him shift, the solid ground of his life cracking, splintering. She wasn't talking about the small grievances or misunderstandings he had feared. She was talking about destroying him, about using lies, manipulating the truth to paint him as someone he wasn't. The thought of her betrayal, of the woman he had given everything to, planning to tear him apart, intentionally and with such coldness, left him breathless. Her voice continued, outlining her plan with unnerving precision, as though it were a simple task to erase him from the life they had shared. The harsh finality in her tone sent a shiver down his spine. "I'll make sure it's airtight. I'll make them believe he's dangerous. I'll have the house, the kids, everything," she said, her words dripping with the certainty that this wasn't just an idea, it was a calculated move. He stood there, rooted to the spot, his pulse hammering in his ears. His body felt numb, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on him like a physical force. The woman he loved, the woman he trusted implicitly, was planning his destruction. She was setting the stage to take everything he had, his reputation, his family, his sanity, using lies as her weapon. His mind raced, trying to process what he had just heard. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But the cold, unfeeling truth of it hit him with the force of a truck. She wasn't just distant anymore. She wasn't just withdrawing. She had already begun to destroy him from the inside, out. And he had never seen it coming. His breath caught in his throat as his worst fears were realized. The world around him seemed to tilt, every memory of their time together now tainted with the bitter sting of betrayal. This wasn't just a crack in their marriage. It was a chasm, and he had been standing at the edge of it without even knowing. He stumbled back, unable to move, unable to think. The hurt, the anger, and the sheer disbelief swirled inside him, a storm he couldn't contain. His chest tightened with a raw, primal pain, the kind that only betrayal could bring. How could she? How could she destroy everything they had for a lie? For leverage and a divorce? The trust he had once placed in her shattered instantly, and with it, the life he had so carefully built. The man who had believed in his family, in the love they shared, now felt like a fool, stranger in his own life. The woman who had promised to be by his side through thick and thin was now the one who was pushing him into the abyss. The confrontation happened later that night, after the weight of what he had overheard had fully settled into his bones, suffocating him. He stood in the kitchen, his hands clenched into fists by his sides, his breath shallow and uneven. The sound of the ticking clock on the wall felt deafening in the silence between them, each second stretching like a painful eternity. His mind raced, but his heart was in pieces, fragments scattered across the coldness of the room. She walked in, her eyes catching his for a brief moment before she quickly looked away, a subtle shift in her posture, as if she already knew the storm was coming. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had loved, now stood before him. But she felt like a stranger, someone unfamiliar, someone alien. He couldn't even look at her the same way anymore. His voice, when it came, was shaking. The raw emotion that had been building up inside him, hunger, betrayal, and heartbreak, broke free. "Is it true?" he asked, his words barely a whisper, the trembling in his voice betraying the depth of his pain. "Are you really planning to accuse me of being mentally unstable? Are you really going to use that against me?" Her gaze faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly composed herself, her expression hardening. She crossed her arms, trying to project an air of control, though the tightness in her stance betrayed the nervousness she was trying to hide. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice cool, almost indifferent. "You're imagining things." "I haven't said anything like that." His chest tightened, and the suffocating feeling of disbelief washed over him. He could hear the lie in her words. He could hear the way she deflected the truth with the same practiced ease she had always used. But this time he wasn't buying it. "You can't lie your way out of this," he said, his voice rising, though he quickly reined it back, aware that his emotions were beginning to betray him. "I heard you. I heard everything. How could you plan this? How could you plan to destroy me?" Her silence was deafening. She didn't meet his eyes. Instead, she stared at the floor, the weight of her guilt pressing down on her in a way she could no longer hide. He could see her fidgeting, unable to hold his gaze, and it sickened him. "You really think you can just walk away from everything we've built? Destroy everything?" His voice cracked as he took a step toward her, his heart pounding with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "You were my partner, my friend. It's the person I trusted the most, and now you're trying to destroy me with lies." She still didn't respond. There was a coldness in the way she stood there, like a wall between them, a distance that had never been there before. It was as though she had already emotionally checked out, already preparing herself for the life she would lead without him. He could feel it, that final cold separation between them that had only been hinted at before. The raw pain of it all hit him like a physical blow. His heart shattered, piece by piece, as the realization of her betrayal settled deep within him. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding or a bad phase. This was deliberate. This was her taking everything he had given her, everything they had built together, and turning it into a weapon to destroy him. The room felt colder as the truth hit him. This wasn't the woman he had married. This was someone else. Someone who had plotted behind his back, carefully and methodically, to tear him apart. He could feel the tremor in his voice, the hollow emptiness in his chest. He had spent so long trying to protect their love, protect their life together, and now all of that seemed meaningless. All the years, all the moments gone in an instant. Her face was unreadable now, but he could feel the weight of her silence bearing down on him. He didn't want to hear her empty denials anymore. He didn't want to hear her try to manipulate the conversation, spin it into something he could somehow believe. He had already lost trust in her. Could say that would undo the damage. And in that moment, he realized he was no longer the man he once was. The man who had believed in love, in trust, in their shared future. That man had died with the weight of her betrayal. He was now a man broken by the woman he had loved, and there was no going back. The silence in the house was suffocating. The weight of her betrayal still lingered in the air, thick and choking. But the raw pain he had once felt had transformed into something darker. The rage that had burned within him now simmered under the surface, controlled and focused, like a predator preparing for its next strike. He sat in the dim light of the living room, his eyes fixed on the floor, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the only sound breaking the stillness. He had been a passive participant in this marriage for too long. No more. The man who had once trusted his wife completely, who had been blindsided by her lies, was gone. In his place stood someone resolute, a man determined to expose the truth, no matter what it took. His first step was clear. He needed evidence. Without it, her lies would stand as truth, and he would lose everything. The thought of losing his dignity, his reputation, his very sanity at her hands filled him with a dark resolve. He had to fight back. The recorder sat on the coffee table, its presence almost mocking in its simplicity. But it was the key to everything, the key to proving she had planned to ruin him. His fingers hovered over the button for a moment before he pressed it down with cold precision. The quiet click echoed through the room, the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. A small red light blinked as it began to record, capturing every word, every movement, every piece of evidence that would bring the truth to light. He felt nothing as he set the recorder down in the bedroom, silently watching his wife as she paced, the familiar rhythm of her voice now tinged with something foreign. He was no longer seeing the woman he had married, the partner, the confidant, but a stranger, someone who had turned into a threat, a manipulator, a liar. The tension in the air was palpable, the atmosphere heavy with the quiet pressure of what was unfolding. His heartbeat seemed unnaturally loud in his ears as he carefully planned each next step. Where to place the next camera? What moments to capture? He had to be meticulous, every decision deliberate and thought out. His mind raced with each new idea, each possible move. But his movements remained deliberate, slow, methodical. His hands were steady as he set up the next camera. The tiny, almost invisible device hidden in the corner of their bedroom was a testament to his new approach. Cold, calculated. His emotions no longer ruled him. He no longer wanted to confront her in anger or beg for answers he knew she would never give. He would expose her lies in silence. With evidence she could never deny, each click of his phone as he reviewed the footage felt like a small victory. The cold, calculated nature of it all seemed to remove any remaining warmth in the house. His heart, once full of hurt and confusion, now only beat with a single purpose: to destroy the illusion she had crafted, to expose the betrayal for the world to see. As the recorder captured the quiet murmurs of her conversations, the manipulative tone creeping into her words, he realized that this was no longer about the woman he had loved. This was about survival, about taking back control of his life. She had made him feel powerless, weak, but now he held the power. The power to destroy her carefully constructed facade, to reveal her for who she truly was. Asterisk. He stood back for a moment, his eyes scanning the room. The calm precision of his movements, the steady planning of each step, was the only thing keeping him anchored in the chaos that had once been his life. No longer a man broken by betrayal, he was now a man on a mission to expose the truth. The house had become a battlefield. The once comforting walls, filled with memories of laughter and shared moments, now stood as silent witnesses to the war he was waging, quiet, calculated, and methodical. His wife, oblivious to the traps he had set, continued with her charade, unaware that her every move was now being documented. Each word, each glance, each calculated action was being captured. This was no longer about love, it was about survival. And he was going to make sure the truth came to light. The recorder was always within reach, a constant companion in his quest for the truth. He watched as his wife, more comfortable now in her manipulation, dropped her guard. The sound of her voice, once warm and familiar, now chilled him to his core. She spoke freely to her friend on the phone, words dripping with malice and falsehoods, the tone so different from when they were alone together. "I'll tell them he's unstable," she said one evening, the recording capturing the sharpness in her voice. "He's been acting weird for months. I've been documenting everything, but I'll make sure I'm the one to get the kids, the house, everything. No one will believe him over me." The cold, calculating quality of her voice sent a shiver down his spine. This was no longer the woman he had known, no longer the partner he had trusted. This was someone who was actively plotting to destroy him. Someone who thought nothing of lying, of tearing apart their lives for her own gain. Her voice held no remorse, no hesitation, just the chilling certainty of a woman who believed she could get away with it all. Asterisk. Each time he listened to the recordings, he felt a dark sense of satisfaction. He wasn't imagining things. He had been right all along. She had been planning this carefully, methodically, and now he had the evidence to prove it. The doubt that had clouded his mind for so long began to fade, replaced by a cold clarity. He wasn't powerless anymore. He was in control. The recordings were irrefutable. He had the proof he needed to expose her. The sound of the phone clicking off, the faint rustle of papers as she wrote down notes in the middle of the night, the quiet exchanges she had with her friends, all of it was now locked in his files, waiting to be used. He couldn't help but feel a strange sense of vindication, knowing that the lies she had spun would soon unravel in front of everyone. It was a bitter satisfaction, but it was satisfaction nonetheless. Yet there was disgust, too. The more he listened, the more he realized just how deeply she had sunk into this web of deception. How cold and calculating she had become, all while pretending to be the loving wife, the caring mother. The stark contrast between the woman he had married and the one he was now hearing in the recordings was unbearable. How had he missed it? How had he been so blind to the lies? The disgust turned inward as he watched her in their home, unaware of the storm that was brewing around her. She had no idea that he was capturing every moment, and that, in itself, made the whole thing feel like a game. A game where she thought she held all the power, when in reality, he was the one pulling the strings now. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't the same man who had once been blinded by love. He'd become something else, something harder, something colder. He was a man on a mission, a man who would expose the truth, no matter the cost. The recordings were his weapon. He was going to make sure she couldn't hide behind her lies anymore. The atmosphere in the house had changed. What had once been a home filled with warmth and shared memories was now a cold, calculating place, a battlefield, silent but filled with tension. Every day the protagonist became more methodical in his pursuit of the truth, the anger and pain. He had felt turning into a sharp, focused resolve. He was no longer a man blindsided by betrayal. He was a man on a mission, determined to expose the woman he had once loved for the liar she was. The recordings he had started capturing now filled his phone and laptop, an archive of deception, manipulation, and lies. The sound of the recorder, switching on, had become a routine, almost mechanical. It was a stark contrast to the warm intimacy he once shared with his wife. Now, there was only the cold, unfeeling click of the device starting, the red light flashing as it silently captured every word. The recordings revealed her true nature, a side of her he had never imagined. He had hoped he was wrong, that he was overreacting, but with every conversation he recorded, his suspicions grew into certainty. He wasn't just hearing things. She had been planning this for months. How to frame him, how to paint him as mentally unstable, how to take everything from him without a second thought. One night, as he sat alone in the dim glow of his laptop, the latest recording played through his headphones. He could hear her voice, calm and steady. The way she spoke when she thought no one was listening, cold, calculated, and completely detached. "He's been getting worse," she said, her voice smooth and emotionless. "I've been keeping track of everything. The outbursts, the mood swings. He's mentally unstable. I'll make sure they believe me. I'll get the kids, the house, everything." The coldness of her words made his stomach churn. Just a betrayal lit was an act of cruelty, a calculated attempt to destroy him. She wasn't merely planning a divorce, she was trying to ruin his life completely. To paint him as someone dangerous, unfit to be trusted, and to take everything he had worked for. The realization hit him hard, like a punch to the gut. This was not the woman he had married. This was someone else, someone capable of manipulative deceit he never would have believed her capable of. With each new recording, the satisfaction of having the evidence he needed grew, but so did the disgust. How could she do this? She so easily manipulate those around her, bend the truth to her will. He had thought their bond was unbreakable, but now it was clear that trust had been shattered long before he realized it. The stark contrast between her carefully constructed public persona and the woman he heard in these recordings sickened him. He couldn't help but wonder how long she had been plotting this, how many lies she had told to cover her tracks. He began to feel a cold sense of power, the satisfaction of knowing he now had the upper hand. The woman who had tried to destroy him was now the one being exposed. He was no longer powerless, no longer blindsided. The truth was in his hands, and he was going to make sure it was revealed no matter the cost. But along with the satisfaction came the disgust. He had never thought he would be reduced to this, listening to recordings of his wife, his partner, plotting his downfall. It made him sick to his core. He had trusted her with everything: his love, his life, his future, and this was how she repaid him. It wasn't just betrayal, it was calculated cruelty. Yet he knew he couldn't stop now. The recordings were irrefutable. The lies she had spun were now caught on tape. She couldn't take it back. This was the point of no return. As he reviewed the evidence, he realized that he wasn't just gathering information, he was preparing for the moment of reckoning, the final confrontation. He had been hurt, manipulated, and betrayed, but now he was in control. And he was going to make sure that everyone knew the truth. No more lies. No more pretending. He would expose her for who she truly was, and he would do it with the cold, ruthless precision that had been forced upon him. The time had come. There was no more waiting, no more wondering. He had all the proof he needed, all the evidence that would expose the woman he had loved for who she truly was. The recordings were irrefutable. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, everything was now laid out in front of him, as clear as day. He stood in the living room, his heart pounding in his chest, but his hands were steady as he prepared the phone. The red light blinked on the screen, and the familiar coldness of the recordings flooded the air once again. But this time, it was different. He wasn't listening in silence, waiting for a truth he wasn't sure existed. Now, he was going to confront her. He was going to face her and make her look at the damage she had caused. She would no longer have the power to control the narrative. His wife entered the room, her eyes scanning his face briefly before she quickly looked away, as if already knowing something was wrong. She had spent so long hiding behind her carefully constructed facade that now, in the face of the truth, she couldn't look him in the eye. Without a word, he pressed play on the phone, the first recording ringing out in the stillness of the room. The sound of her voice, calm, assured, calculating, filled the space between them. "I'll make sure they believe me," she said in the recording. "He's unstable, emotionally erratic. I'll say he's dangerous. No one will question. Me, I'll get everything." He could feel the shock waves of the words hit her as they echoed in the room. She went pale, her eyes widening in disbelief. For a moment she seemed frozen, her hands trembling ever so slightly as the truth hit her, like a tidal wave. The woman who had played this cruel game, pulling the strings, manipulating him and everyone around her, was now on the receiving end. And there was no escaping it. Asterisk, he didn't speak as the recording continued, playing out her plans in sickening detail. Every word, every false claim she had planned to make was now exposed for what it was. Lies. The lies that had nearly cost him everything. When the recording ended, there was a heavy silence between them, the weight of the truth pressing down on both of them. She opened her mouth, as if to say something, but no words came out. Her facade, so carefully crafted over the years, began to crumble. He saw it, the flicker of panic, the hesitation in her eyes, the fleeting realization that the game was up. The walls she had built were no longer protecting her. The coldness of her silence now felt deafening. She couldn't hide anymore. The woman who had planned to tear apart everything he had worked for, everything they had built together, was exposed. He could see it in her eyes, the realization that there was no way out, no excuse to offer, no way to turn back the clock. She was trapped by her own lies. The fury that had been simmering inside him for so long now flared up. But this time it wasn't a blind. Regit was controlled, precise. He wasn't the broken man he had been before. He wasn't the one who had been deceived. He was the one in control now. Why? The word left his mouth almost as a whisper, but it was enough to break the silence between them. "How could you do this to me? To us?" She didn't respond immediately. Her face was a mixture of guilt and something darker, fear. The truth had finally caught up to her. And for the first time in years, he saw her for who she really was, not the woman he had once trusted, but the person who had used that trust to destroy him. I didn't mean to, she stammered, her voice shaky. I didn't think it would go this far. The emptiness inside him deepened as he looked at her, the woman who had once been his partner. He had loved her with everything he had, and now that love felt like a distant memory, the cold, calculated. Lies she had spun were too much to forgive, too much to even comprehend. The satisfaction of exposing the truth was there, but it was fleeting. It didn't bring him peace. It didn't heal the wounds she had caused. The emptiness he felt now, standing in front of her as she crumbled under the weight of her own actions, was far greater than any sense of victory. He had regained control, but it had cost him. He had to admit that to himself, this confrontation. As necessary as it was, had changed him. It had made him colder, harder. The trust he had once placed in her, in their marriage, was gone. He would never be the same again. As she left the room, unable to offer any more excuses, he stood there in silence, the weight of the truth heavy in the air around him. He had won, but he had also lost. The days following the confrontation passed. In a blur, but the weight of the fallout lingered in every corner of the house. The once peaceful, familiar walls now felt like they were closing in on him, suffocating him with the aftermath of the truth being exposed. He had won. The recordings. The proof had shattered her lies, her manipulations. She was out of his life now. But her departure left behind a vacuum of emptiness that he couldn't ignore. The first few days were filled with the sound of silence. Her absence echoed through the house, louder than any argument ever could. That, once bustling home where their shared moments had lived, now felt cold, desolate, almost unrecognizable. The familiar sounds, the soft shuffle of her footsteps, and the sound of her voice asking how his day went. The little laughs they had shared were gone, leaving only the echoes of a life that once was. As the days passed, news of their breakdown reached the community. His wife's carefully constructed image of the perfect family, the devoted wife, was shattered. Whispers spread quickly, the judgment of their friends and family swift and unforgiving. She had spent years building a reputation that she now lost in an instant as the truth of her manipulations came to light. Her lies, her plot to destroy him, had turned her into the villain in their story. The community's opinion of her crumbled almost overnight, and the consequences were immediate. But for him, he had exposed the truth. But the victory was not as sweet as he had imagined. The pain of betrayal still sat heavy in his chest, and despite the justice, despite the relief of knowing she could no longer deceive him, he couldn't shake the sense of loss. He had won, but at what cost? The life he had once known was now irrevocably altered. His trust shattered beyond repair. He couldn't help but replay the confrontation over and over in his mind, hearing her voice crack as the truth unfolded, seeing the moment her confidence crumbled. But even as that moment of triumph played back in his mind, it didn't bring him peace. No. The satisfaction of exposing her lies felt fleeting. It was as if he had torn down a wall, only to discover that the damage had spread further than he had realized. The coldness of the house settled deeper into his bones as the days went on. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was a reminder of the emptiness that followed her departure. The echoes of the past, the laughter, the love, the shared moments now felt like a distant memory, a part of a life that had been erased by her actions. His heart felt heavy, burdened by the weight of everything that had happened as he stood alone in the house. The silence pressing in on him, he began to understand something he hadn't before. Revenge, no matter how justified, didn't come without its own cost. He'd exposed the truth, yes, but in doing so, he had lost something that could never be regained. The trust, the love, the foundation of their life, those things were gone, and they couldn't be replaced. He had taken back control, but it didn't bring him the peace he had hoped for. Instead, it had left him with a sense of emptiness, and understanding that no matter how right he was in his actions, there would be no real victory. The pain of betrayal would linger long after the truth had been revealed. The finality of the situation, the irreparable damage to their marriage, sat heavy on him. And in that weight, he realized that no matter what came next, the emotional toll of what had happened, would be something he would carry forever. The house was eerily still, the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall, the only sound that filled the empty space. Each tick echoed, like a reminder of the time that had passed since the storm had broken. Each second marking the distance between who he was before and who he had become. The silence in the room felt suffocating, as if the very walls were closing in on him, pressing him into a moment he could not escape. He sat in the same chair where they had once shared their mornings together. The familiar chair now feeling foreign, almost haunting. The warmth of their shared conversations, the laughter that had filled this space, now seemed like ghost-faded memories tainted by the bitterness of betrayal. His fingers traced the edge of the table, the smooth wood beneath his fingertips a sharp contrast to the chaos that had unfolded. He had won. He had exposed her for the woman she truly was. The recordings, the evidence, everything he needed to prove the truth was in his hands. But as he sat there, surrounded by the remnants of what had once been their life, the victory felt hollow. What had he gained from all of this? Vindication? Yes. Relief, perhaps, for a moment, but peace? No. Peace was something he could not find in this silence. In the empty spaces left by her departure, the realization washed over him, slowly bittersweet and heavy. Revenge had not healed him. It had not repaired the trust that had been shattered. It had not brought back the love that had once seemed so unbreakable. Your thought that exposing the truth would bring him closure, that seeing her exposed would somehow mend the wound she had inflicted on him. But it hadn't. All it had done was strip away the illusion, the mask that had hidden her lies. The truth had come out, but it hadn't set him free. Instead, it had left him in a world where everything felt uncertain, where the foundation of his life had been eroded, and all that remained was the cold, raw reality of what had been lost. The quiet ticking of the clock seemed louder now, marking the passing of time in a way that felt slow, almost painful. The solitude of the house was overwhelming. There was no one to share the emptiness with, no one to fill the silence that had replaced the warmth of companionship. The absence of her was not just in the space around him, but in his heart, where the remnants of their love used to be. Love, now tainted by betrayal, could never return. The pieces of their life together, the life he had built and trusted, were scattered beyond repair. His mind wandered back to the moments before everything changed, the days when he had believed in her, when he had thought they were a team. Now those memories felt distant, like they belonged to someone else, someone who hadn't been deceived. He had given everything to that relationship, to that woman, and in return, she had tried to destroy him, to take everything from him. But as much as he hated to admit it, he had changed too. The man who had once trusted icily, who had believed in love without question, no longer existed. In his place was someone harder, someone who had learned the bitter cost of revenge. He had exposed the truth, yes, but at what cost to his own soul? The scars of betrayal, of heartbreak, were something he could never erase. They would remain with him, marking him forever. He had survived, but survival wasn't the same as healing. And as the quiet settled around him, he realized that the emotional scars of betrayal would never fully fade. He would carry them with him, always, no matter how much time passed. The victory had come with a price that he had not fully understood until now. The house, once a battleground, was beginning to feel different. The stillness was no longer suffocating. It had shifted into something more peaceful, more manageable. The echoes of the past remained, but they were fading, softened by time, by the passage of the days. He had lived through the storm, weathered the chaos, and now slowly, he was finding his way back to something resembling peace. The sun broke through the clouds one morning, casting a soft, golden light across the living room. For the first time in what felt like forever, the warmth felt like a promise, a sign, a small but significant shift in his life. The light, once a reminder of all that had been lost, now symbolized something else, new beginnings, the potential for healing. It was a reminder that, even after the darkest of storms, the sun would eventually rise again, He sat at the same table where they had once shared meals. The same table where he had heard her voice, filled with betrayal, reverberate in his mind. But now, as he looked around, there was a subtle sense of peace in the stillness. The house was empty, but it was no longer suffocating. He had reclaimed this space, this life, not through the revenge that had consumed him for so long, but through the quiet strength that had always been there, buried beneath the hurt. There was no grand moment of clarity. There were no fireworks, no sudden bursts of joy. It was a slow process, a decision to continue forward, to take the first steps toward rebuilding what had been torn apart. The past, with all its pain and betrayal, would always haunt him, but it no longer defined him. He didn't need to erase the memories. He didn't need to forget what had happened. The lessons of the past were too important to be buried. But he had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it, understanding its place in the story of his life, and moving forward with the strength to survive, to rebuild, to grow. The day was quiet. There were no sudden revelations, no dramatic changes. But he felt something stir inside him, a quiet resolve to keep moving. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long while, he felt the possibility of something new, something worth fighting for. The calming presence of solitude enveloped him, no longer an enemy, but a space to breathe, to think, to begin again. There were still pain, still scars, but they were no longer. Oh wait, they were a part of him, yes, but they no longer controlled him. The sun broke through the clouds once more, its warm light spilling across the room, filling the spaces with the promise of new beginnings. And as he stood there, looking out the window, he realized that he was no longer defined by betrayal. He was defined by his ability to survive, to move forward, and that in itself was enough.